This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. An 8th straight year of increase in Taiwan's military budget. But even at a record high, the government says there is no intention to engage in a regional arms race. Australia ramping up its military might too, with Canberra investing $570 million on a facility to produce long-range missiles driven by rising concerns over China. And after wrapping up his Russia visit, Chinese Premier Li Qiang travels to neighboring Belarus, where several economic deals are expected to be inked. And Indonesia's Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi heads to China to meet with a counterpart Wang Yi and co-chair talks on boosting bilateral cooperation. And PwC China bracing for tough penalties for its audit of collapsed developer Evergrande, which could include a 6-month ban on its business. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, we delve into the so-called EV phobia in South Korea, a fear sparked by recent cases of electric vehicle fires, one of which saw more than 100 cars gutted in an underground car park in Seoul. And China's population is aging, and aging fast. But with the social stigma surrounding nursing homes, we find out how caregivers and health authorities are managing the silver tsunami. Well, Taiwan's defense budget for 2025 is set to reach a new high, marking 8 straight years of record military spending as the island seeks to manage differences with mainland China. Well, the latest budget proposal released by the cabinet plans to set aside some $20.2 billion for the defense sector. Well, that represents an increase of 7.7% year on year, which would outpace Taiwan's estimated GDP of 3.26% in 2025. Well, the spending also includes a $2.8 billion special budget for new fighter jets and increased missile production. The budget proposal is the first since President William Lai took office in May. It will be subject to approval from the legislature, where opposition parties jointly hold a slim majority. Taiwan is beefing up its defense spending amid growing threats from China, which claims the self-ruled island as part of its territory. Beijing has been ramping up military and political pressure in recent years to assert those claims, which Taipei rejects. And for more, Victoria Jen, she joins us live now from Taipei. Well, Vic, it appears that there is a big emphasis on defense spending for next year. Why is that?
Well, it's always been a target for the ruling Democratic Progressive Party to beef up Taiwan's defense capability. In fact, it has always been its target to increase military spending to as much as 3% of the island's GDP since former President Chen Shui-bian back in 2000. Now, while the latest figures still fell short of the target, but the government still hopes that they will achieve that goal eventually. And some U.S. officials and scholars have even suggested that Taiwan should increase its military spending to at least 5% of its GDP. And this is considerably higher than the 3% that DPP is targeting for. And now another interesting fact to note is that despite the constant political wrangling between the ruling DPP and the opposition KMT, increasing the military budget is actually one of the few issues that both parties actually agreed on. Now, aside from the military threat from China, Taiwan's fighter jet training accident in recent years have also contributed to the urgent need to upgrade Taiwan's aging defense hardware. And so far, there has been reports of at least 10 accidents in the past 8 years that has resulted in the death of 18 people. So this is definitely an urgent need that the government has to address. Now, the defense budget has already been approved by the cabinet, and it will be submitted to the parliament for approval. While the parliament is currently under the control of the opposition, analysts are saying that there is likely to be passed with no issue.
So, Vic, how does this particular defense spending, how does it differ or compare to previous years?
Well, Taiwan's defense. This is Taiwan's defense budget next year is the first for Taiwan President William Lai since he took office in May. Now, its growth is considerably higher compared to his predecessor Tsai Ing-wen, who has been criticized for being overly conservative. Under her administration, the military spending has increased on an average of about 3 to 4% a year. And so, despite the latest high increase, the Taiwan's defense ministry stressed that, and I quote, "We will not join in an arms race with other governments. We will increase steadily according to our needs," unquote. And in this case, is the urgent need to upgrade the aging defense hardware. Now, the defense budget has also come at a sensitive time because next Wednesday is the William Lai's 100th day in office. Now, the budget announcement is clearly a statement by his administration, especially to China. Now, we know that cross-strait relations have taken a turn for the worse since he took office. And he has been labeled by Beijing as a separatist for his hardline pro-independence position. And some analysts said that even with the recent hike in the defense budget, is unlikely to help much with Taiwan, given the fact that China's military spending is 12 times higher than that of Taiwan. So analysts are saying that it's better for the two sides to hold peaceful dialogue to resolve the cross-strait issues.
Well, thanks very much, Victoria Jen, for that report live from Taipei. Besides Taiwan, Australia is also gearing up to boost its military hardware. The government will invest up to $570 million to manufacture, or rather invest up to that amount of dollars in a facility north of Sydney that will manufacture long-range missiles. Growing concerns over China, whose defense spending has increased steadily, has fueled an arms race across the region. Well, the Australian factory will break ground later this year, producing anti-ship cruise missiles and weapons that can be fitted to F-35A aircraft. Both can also be deployed against land-based targets. Reports say the facility would be capable of producing 100 missiles a year. The Albanese government's plan is in partnership with Norwegian missile manufacturer Kongsberg. Canberra has been stepping up its defense capabilities in recent years. It's launched a series of defense projects, including developing a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. Australia is among several Asia-Pacific nations that have drastically stepped up defense spending. And earlier, my colleague Paul Sung spoke to Dr. Bernard Luu, Senior Fellow of the Military Studies Program at the RSIS. And we asked him what could be causing the arms buildup in the region, and whether it could be due to US-China tensions, South China Sea disputes, or even tensions over Taiwan.
It's essentially all three in a sense. All three scenarios don't exactly paint the region in a very positive, stable light. Remember that in most global security outlooks, potential hotspots have tended to be identified in Asia first and foremost. The Taiwan Strait was always fairly high on the list as a potential hotspot. The Korean Peninsula was another one. Sino-American tensions similarly, and relations between China and India have never been terribly good as well. So these are all contributory factors towards seeing the region as potentially ripe for conflict.
Now, Australia has announced plans to manufacture missiles domestically. Why do you think this is so?
To a certain extent, I think in the Australian case, I think it has in part to do with a desire to be a little more self-sufficient in terms of its defense acquisitions. Australia's security outlook has always depended on what it calls great and powerful friends. For the longest time, Australia saw Great Britain as its great and powerful friend. But after the fall of Singapore and the withdrawal of the British in 1942 from Southeast Asia, Australia then began to reorientate its security outlooks and identified a new great and powerful friend. This time it was the United States, and it has remained so since then. The problem with this relationship is that it makes the Australians highly dependent on the United States and other European parties when it comes to recapitalizing its military expenditure, modernizing the Australian Defence Forces. So there's always been this idea in Australia that they should have some degree of self-sufficiency when it comes to the production of weapon systems.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang has arrived in Belarus after wrapping up his visit to Russia that saw President Vladimir Putin and China's second highest official both hailing deepening ties. Well, Mr. Li's trip to Minsk is at the invitation of Belarusian Prime Minister Roman Golovchenko, and the two are expected to hold talks later today. And for more analysis, let's speak with Dasha Zhu. She joins us live from Moscow. So Dasha, what exactly is on the agenda for Premier Li's visit to Belarus?
Well, indeed, the focus of this visit is on the expansion of trade, economic ties, as well as investment partnerships between the two countries. We understand that in those talks, there will be several formats, the narrow format, the expanded format, and also Li Qiang is expected to meet with the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko. Alexander Lukashenko, greeting Li Qiang in Belarus, has said that the two countries are eyeing the expansion of their trade relations. He said that there are 15 new strategic investment projects that are worth $3 billion that are now being developed by the two sides. And also, we understand that as a result of those meetings, the sides are expected to sign the package agreement on the economic cooperation that will be touching several areas that are related to trade, to industrial and technological cooperation, science, as well as education, transport, digital economy, and many others. So indeed, it is a very important visit for Belarus as well as for China. And certainly the whole package of different economic deals is expected to be signed after.
So why exactly do you think China is looking to develop closer ties with Belarus?
Well, certainly you have to keep in mind that Belarus is part of the so-called union state of Russia and Belarus. So there are many roadmaps that are between Russia and Belarus on the development of their joint relations. So that's why we are seeing the intensification of ties between Moscow and Beijing, which have declared the no limits partnership. And that's why it does seem to be quite natural that Minsk is also part of this equation. At the same time, you have to keep in mind that there has been several exchanges at different levels between Belarus and China over the course of the past year. We also understand that the sides have held the cooperation in the military sphere. They have held joint military drills on the Belarusian territory, just a few miles away from the Belarusian border with Poland. So certainly there is a lot going on, but this is set to be, this cooperation and these ties are set to be beneficial for the development of both countries.
Right, many thanks for that. Dasha Zhu speaking to us live from Moscow. We are going for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Canadian convenience store leader Alimentation Couche-Tard may need to secure the Japanese government's approval for its multi-billion-dollar proposed takeover of Seven & I parent of 7-Eleven. And China's autonomous vehicle firm WeRide said to have delayed its U.S. IPO in what would have been a rare sizable listing by a Chinese firm since DD Global in 2021. Hello again. Good to have in East Asia Tonight. Roland Lim is standing by for the very latest in business. And Roland, eye-popping takeover offer for Japan's 7 & I Holdings. It's not going to be that straightforward, is it?
That's right. Reports are saying that the government needs to be involved. Canadian giant alimentation Couche-Tard's attempt to buy Seven & I Holding needs to be approved by Japan's government. Now, that's as the parent of 7-Eleven also operates in potentially sensitive industries. The Canadian firm earlier this week launched a preliminary takeover of 7-I in a deal worth at least $34 billion. Now, if successful, this would be the biggest takeover of a Japanese firm by a foreign entity. Under Japan's foreign exchange law, the government needs to pre-screen overseas buyers of local companies in industries viewed as sensitive. Now, although 7&I is best known for its retail business, mainly the 7-Eleven convenience chain, its 180-company-strong portfolio spans banking and petroleum. It also includes security services, which are covered under the foreign exchange law. Now, this means that Couche-Tard must receive pre-approval from the Japanese government to obtain a stake in 7&I. Now, if Japanese authorities decide the deal would threaten economic security, they could order or a change of terms or block the acquisition, even if both companies agreed to a deal. The Bank of Korea has kept its benchmark lending rate unchanged for the 13th straight time amid rising price pressures. The central bank left the key rate at 3.5% as widely expected. Economists expect the Bank of Korea to start easing policy in October. Around the same time, the U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to deliver its first rate cut in 4 years. But the BOK may need to see prices stabilizing before it starts easing policy. Inflation last month rose from an 11-month low in June, moving further away from the central bank's 2% target. A weak Korean won has added to price pressures as it's one of Asia's worst performing currencies this year. Now, authorities fear a rate cut could usher in further currency depreciation, raising costs of living as well as production. An export rally that's driving economic growth has persuaded the Bank of Korea that it can retain its restrictive monetary policy for a little while longer. Now, officials added that rising household debt and home prices remain key concerns. The central bank lowered its 2024 growth projection to 2.4% from 2.5% earlier. That's on the back of weak domestic demand. South Korea is considering plans to establish new regulations to govern payment gateway service providers following massive payment delays at 2 e-commerce platforms. The chief of South Korea's financial regulators said in a meeting with credit finance businesses that the incident with online shopping platforms Tmon and WeMakePrice highlighted the need to reform the country's online payment system. Kim Yong-hwan added that the plans may include a redesign of the payment infrastructure. E-commerce firm Tmon and WeMakePrice are facing liquidity issues in paying their vendors after its parent firm, that's Singapore-based Q10, is said to be suffering from a tight cash situation following multiple aggressive merger deals. South Korea's government reported that payment delays have amounted close to $615 million so far and may reach close to $1 billion. PwC China has reportedly told clients it expects regulators to slap it with a 6-month business ban. Now, starting as soon as September, the ban will be part of punishment over its audit of collapsed property developer China Evergrande Group. Media reports say the ban is likely to come with a fine of at least $56 million. Now, these would constitute the toughest actions by Chinese regulators against a Big Four accounting firm. Authorities are investigating PwC China after finding Evergrande had inflated its mainland revenues by $78 billion in the 2 years before the developer defaulted on its debts in 2021. And that's despite PwC giving the account a clean bill of health. In May, there were reports that PwC China could be hit with a record $140 million fine. Now, while the punishment isn't likely to threaten the survival of PwC China, it will be highly disruptive. Now, the auditor would not be able to sign off on financial results and IPOs. In addition, many mainland listed firms are barred from working with an auditor that the authorities have sanctioned within 3 years. PwC China's revenue hitting $1.1 billion in 2022, making it the country's biggest accounting firm then. Checking in on the markets in Greater China region, the Hang Seng Index, it climbed 1.44% today thanks to stellar report cards from the likes of smartphone maker Xiaomi as well as insurance giant AIA. But both the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen Component are lower today. Traders digesting the latest political developments surrounding Beijing's tit-for-tat trade tussle with the EU. Speaking of which, Beijing has launched an anti-subsidy investigation into dairy imports from the EU. It comes a day after the bloc published a series of additional duties on Chinese electric vehicle imports. Now, Beijing's probe is the strongest retaliation yet against those EV tariffs. The bloc's chief diplomat, Joseph Borrell, said in an event this week that the EU must not be naive that a trade war was maybe unavoidable. Also checking in on Chinese property developer Kaisa after it warned that it expects to see a bigger net loss for the first half of the year, following a decline in the property deliveries as well as higher impairment provisions. Kaisa shares are just 10 cents Hong Kong currently, and that's down nearly 9% for the day. A Chinese autonomous vehicle firm, WeRide Inc., has reportedly delayed its plans to list in the US. It's still preparing for its first share sale, partly to finish documentation for US securities regulators. Now, it's seeking to raise as much as $440 million in the IPO and concurrent private placement. The delay could create problems for WeRide, though. That's as Chinese securities regulators' approval for its listing will expire at the end of this week. It could make WeRide the first to see its CSRC approval lapse during book building. It's not certain if the firm would need to reapply. Now, the postponement comes as the US set to widen its confrontation with China over autonomous and internet-connected vehicles. Now, WeRide develops self-driving technology, which it's testing or deploying commercially in 30 cities in 7 countries. Its IPO would have been a rare sizable listing by a Chinese firm in the US since the disastrous 2021 listing of ride-sharing company Didi Global. Chinese EV makers are shifting into high gear with their expansion plans for Mexico. BYD, for one, is inching closer to building its own factory in the Latin American nation, following in the footsteps of Volvo, Tesla, and Stellantis. Now, the firm says it has picked 3 states as top candidates for the factory location. It's also looking into various incentive proposals from these state governments, including fiscal, land, and preferential pricing. Now, once set up, BYD's Mexico plant will make around 150,000 cars in its first stage, and then eventually, up to 500,000 units in a few years' time. The company spokesperson maintains that the factory will serve the domestic market rather than the US. Now, that's with concern in Washington over Chinese EVs possibly flooding the US market. Remember, Mexico has a special trade agreement with the US and Canada since 2020. It allows vehicles assembled in Mexico to enter the US at a much lower tariff or none at all. Washington is reportedly pressuring its Latin neighbor to keep Chinese EV makers at bay and not to offer them any investment incentives, such as tax cuts. And that is the business update. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, U.S. prosecutors charge a Chinese man in New York with espionage for providing Beijing with information on groups it views as potentially being adverse. And the operator of Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant suspends a trial to remove radioactive debris from a reactor. You're watching East Asia tonight. An 8th straight year of increase in Taiwan's military budget. But even at a record high, the government says there is no intention to engage in a regional arms race. Australia looking to boost its capabilities as well, investing $570 million to produce long-range missiles locally, driven by rising concerns over China. And PwC says it is expecting a 6-month business ban in China over its audit of collapsed property developer Evergrande. Indonesia's Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi will pay a visit to China over the next 2 days, where she will meet with her counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The two are set to co-chair the 5th meeting of the Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation between the two countries. Ms. Retno and Mr. Wang previously met in April this year when Indonesian officials hosted the Chinese Foreign Minister in Jakarta. and they discussed mutual economic relations, among other things, including potential cooperation in industrial development, energy transition, and food security. And they met again last month in Laos, where both sides vowed to maintain close communication and to jointly safeguard regional stability and prosperity. Well, China is Indonesia's largest trading partner and a major stakeholder in the country, with over $7.4 billion in investments last year alone. And for more, CNA's Saiful Bari Ismail, he joins us live now from Jakarta. So, Saiful, what can we expect from the meeting between Ms. Retno and Mr. Wang?
Well, both foreign ministers are expected to discuss how Indonesia and China can improve trade and investment cooperation. China was Indonesia's second largest investor last year, and Jakarta is keen to attract more investments from Beijing, especially in the planned Nusantara capital city development in East Kalimantan. China has spent billions of dollars on Indonesia under the Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure push and in the development of downstream supply chains such as the nickel smelter industry, tourism and electric vehicle manufacturing. Observers said Ms. Retno may also use the opportunity to explain to Beijing about Jakarta's plan to impose anti-dumping duties. Now, in June, Indonesia's Trade Minister Zulkifli Hasan proposed imposing import duties of up to 200% on Chinese products, including clothing, steel, textile, and ceramics. He said there was a need to protect local businesses against the influx of goods from China due to overcapacity and oversupply in that country as a result of increased tariffs from Western markets. Now, Jakarta had clarified that the policy is not aimed specifically at any country, particularly China. However, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China will closely monitor the situation and respond to any safeguard tariffs that may affect Chinese companies. Now, Ms. Retno and her counterpart Wang Yi may also discuss preparations for the Indonesia-China ministerial level dialogue, which is expected to take place next year. The dialogue will be part of celebrations to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Indonesia-China diplomatic relations.
Saiful, also, how do you think the bilateral ties will be affected, if it will, when Indonesia's President-elect Prabowo takes the helm, which is going to happen in October?
Well, bilateral relations between Indonesia and China are likely to continue to be good. And as an indication of this, we saw how China became the first country visited by Defense Minister and President-elect Prabowo Subianto about 2 months after winning the presidential election by a landslide. Now, in April, Mr. Prabowo met Chinese President Xi Jinping and said that he was determined to build on President Joko Widodo's achievements with China as a foundation for his programs once he becomes Indonesia's 8th president. Now, observers expect relations between Indonesia and China to continue to strengthen based on the strong foundation established over the past 10 years by Mr. Widodo, who has good personal relations with Mr. Xi. Now, the Chinese president had said that China views its relations with Indonesia from a strategic and long-term perspective and is willing to deepen all-round strategic cooperation with Indonesia for the benefit of their two peoples as well as regional and world peace and development. Now, Mr. Prabowo's first overseas trip since his election victory was viewed in the context of the broader competition for influence between the US and China. However, observers believe the trip is unlikely to indicate a drastic departure from Indonesia's diplomatic balancing act. Indonesia has sought to keep a delicate balance in support for China and the US, and this crucial dynamic is not expected to be lost once Mr. Prabowo takes over the presidency. Now, while China and Indonesia have maintained largely amicable ties, Beijing's aggressive claims over regional waters have tested the relationship at times, including in Indonesia's North Natuna Sea, where illegal Chinese fishing activities continue to agitate Jakarta.
Hey, many thanks for that update. Saiful Bari Ismail speaking to us from Jakarta. The U.S. prosecutors have charged a Chinese man in New York with operating as an illegal agent and spying for Beijing. 67-year-old Yuanjun Tang allegedly acted as a spy from 2018 to 2023 under the orders of China's State Security Ministry. He reportedly gave intelligence officers information about individuals and groups viewed as potentially adverse by Beijing, which includes prominent US-based Chinese pro-democracy activists and dissidents. Tang is also accused of making false statements to the FBI. He had claimed he was no longer able to access an email account used to communicate with his Chinese handler. The Department of Justice says Tang is a former Chinese citizen who was imprisoned for his activities as a dissident. He reportedly defected to Taiwan in 2002 and was later granted asylum in the US and eventually became a citizen. Local media reports say he had agreed to work for China's intelligence agency in a bid to see his family back on the mainland. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy to the US says that they are not aware of the case details. Japan's crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant operator TEPCO has hit the pause button in its attempt to extract radioactive debris from one of the 3 reactors there. TEPCO says it identified setup errors in the device to pick up melted fuel and suspended the trial operation this morning. The operator has not indicated when it will try again, but President Tomoaki Kobayakawa says that it's better to carry out the work in a safe and steady manner rather than rushing it. As a first step, TEPCO is looking to retrieve up to 3 grams of waste out of the estimated 800 tons across all 3 reactors. The operation will involve inserting a telescopic device equipped with a gripper that can extend up to 22 meters, in a process that is expected to take around a week for the device to reach the debris. The collected material will be taken to Ibaraki Prefecture for analysis. In South Korea, recent high-profile incidents of electric vehicles catching fire have sparked fears among the public, with some media dubbing it EV phobia. Well, car dealers say they are seeing a surge in second-hand EVs on the market, while some places are banning EVs. Well, Lim Yun-suk has more from Seoul.
Taxi driver Park Jong-soon bought this electric vehicle about 4 months ago as he wanted to spend less on fuel. He pays about a third of what it cost to fill up his previous diesel car. He's happy about the savings, but the recent EV fires are putting him on edge.
네, 우리 아파트에도 지하에서 충전을 하고 있는데 불안해요, 사실. 한 번씩 세워놓은 차가 화재가 나니까 불안해요.
Currently, about 14% of the 240,000 registered taxis across South Korea are EVs. In total, there are more than 500,000 EVs in the country, which account for about 2% of registered vehicles. But the surge in safety concerns is hurting South Korea's EV market. Song Soo-chan, a used car dealer for about 45 years, says more EV owners are trying to sell their cars, but there are no takers.
예, 나오는 차는 덜어 있는데요. 우리가 소화를 못 시켜요. 팔리지가 않으니까. 팔려야 사는 거 아니에요. 예, 가격이 떨어져도 잘 거래가 안 돼요, 지금. 하루에 몇 대씩 나가던 게 요새는 한두 대도 안 나가니까.
Other dealers here at Seoul's largest used car market, Changandong, tell me similar stories. According to used car trading platform K-Car, listings from people wanting to sell EVs rose 184% in the first week of August from a week earlier. One dealer for second-hand Mercedes-Benz EVs says he has received inquiries, but most of them just wanted to know if prices will fall further, and he doesn't know. Experts say the massive damage after a Mercedes-Benz EV caught fire in an underground parking lot in Incheon on August 1st has changed people's perspectives on EVs.
이렇게 큰 사고가 처음이었기 때문에 기존에 한 대 불탔다, 2대 불탔다 이 정도까지는 어느 정도 억셉트를 했어도 한 대 때문에 160대까지 손상을 입었다라는 것에 대해서 상당한 충격을 받은 상황이죠. 그러다 보면 전기차 이걸 계속 타야 돼? 라는 생각에 미치게 됐고.
It doesn't help that just days later there was another EV fire in a parking tower in South Chungcheong province that took more than an hour to put out. Because of incidents like these, EVs are now banned from some places like underground apartment parking lots, hospitals, and even public parking spaces in downtown Seoul. But Professor Kwon thinks the negative sentiments will cool down together with the summer heat. especially since the government is putting in place new measures. These include urging car makers to reveal what batteries they use. But experts say much more needs to be done since EVs are here to stay. The government must enforce strict regulations to make sure safety measures like sprinklers are in place. The huge fire on August 1st was made worse because the sprinklers in the parking lot did not work properly. Lim Yang-seok, CNA, Seoul.
The time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China's ongoing demographic crisis and how the country is preparing to meet a swelling silver tsunami on today's edition of CNA Plus. And the latest in tech and innovations at the World Robot Conference in Beijing. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. Well, China is facing a demographic crisis. The country is aging and aging fast. In 2023, the country had 297 million people, or about 20% of the population above the age of 60. And by 2035, that number will jump to 400 million. Well, that's more than the entire population of the U.S. A swelling silver tsunami comes with an immense challenge of caring for a vast aging population. And to tell us more is Insight's Nicholas Darus, who is here for the very first time on East Asia Tonight. So good to have you on board. So, Nick, just give us a little bit of context here. Tell us, how did China's population actually get to this point?
So it's two things. It is a falling birth rate and longer life expectancy. So for decades, China has had the one-child policy, which has resulted in a shrinking population. But as, China's economy grew, so did living and healthcare standards. And as such, people are living longer. In the 1950s, life expectancy was, around 50. But now people are living well into their 70s and their 80s.
Well, 70s and 80s. Yeah. So how then do you think China, they'll have to come up with some innovative solutions to try and cope with this aging population, don't they?
Yeah. So, while they have a number of solutions, lined up already, one of the other challenges, that China will face, is that, China is a society that's still very much grounded in traditional values. And one of those values being filial piety. There's a Chinese saying that goes that, 百善孝为先, which means out of all the virtues out there, filial piety is the first. However, adherence to this value is not without its challenges, as one of my profiles told me.
Three times a day, 7 days a week, Xia Hui prepares food for her parents. As the eldest daughter, she has taken on the burden of caring for her 88-year-old mother and 90-year-old father.
月经之前，妈妈觉得有点不舒服，所以妈妈后来再去检查，胃的时候，医生说她已经是胃癌晚期了，所以后来我们就做了个手术。妈妈到现在2年多，2年多时间里面，几乎是每天都是我在照顾。
Xia Hui used to live in Beijing with her husband, but has since moved back to Shanghai to care for her parents. This means being apart from him and giving up on a small business she once had.
这个太大的影响了，因为我以前就是因为也做一些娱乐啊，做一些朋友认识也很多啊。自从妈妈病了以后，我就放弃了我的一些娱乐活动啊。前2天朋友一直约我吃饭啊，喝下午茶，我一直说没有时间，真的没有时间。我爸爸现在也90岁了，有的时候可能我也不知道是老年痴呆还是他有那种暴躁狂躁症。反正我在家里其实我也很委屈，因为我在家里面，我爸爸每一次觉得我就是个小孩，10岁的小孩，什么事情都要说我，什么事情都要骂我。
So, Nick, I really feel for your profile. She doesn't have any time for herself. She's caring for her parents. And not to mention that she doesn't even have any kids, right? So, I'm wondering, is there any kind of help that's available for, caregivers like your profile?
Yeah, so she has thought about getting, extra help, but, the father refuses any kind of help, because there's still this, expectation that is the duty of the daughter to take care of the parents, But however, some of the other profiles that I've spoken to, this idea of being filial is slowly shifting. And, we go back to the one-child policy, where we have, this one child that is caring for two parents. If this one child has to go and work, then, he or she is unable to provide adequate care for the parents, And so in the exploration of this issue, we visited some, modern nursing homes in China, and you can sort of view that in the show.
Right. That sounds like a really interesting story that you're covering. And also you talked about filial piety, right? How the daughters have to take care of the parents and all of that. Are there any other taboos or challenges that, China is confronting?
Yeah. So, the other, challenge is that there's sort of this perception of these elder care facilities. China increasingly will have to build more and more of these elder care facilities. However, as we will listen in a bit, there's still some stigmas surrounding them. Let's have a listen.
When the government announced plans to build 200 nursing homes by 2020, residents living near proposed sites protested, afraid that the homes would affect property prices or bring bad luck.
觉得好像因为养老院呢，毕竟还是这个要住老年，住的老年人确实也有去世的因素，但是这个不是一个普遍现象。其实现在应该讲普遍现象呢是养老院作为配套的公共设施，反而是有利于 改善这个地方的居住条件，甚至房价都提高了。其实，这个跟老百姓，特别是老年人沟通好了，他还是能理解。
大家对养老院的认知是越来越好，越来越觉得是一个可以作为晚年生活的地方。但是呢，过去的遗留下来的给人们的印象，养老院就是福利院，养老院它是一个叫等死的地方。
So, Nick, we saw there in the footage. I mean, the retirement home looks pretty impressive, nice and clean, and all of that. And it looks like there's also been a shift in the thinking of what these retirement homes are like. But what else do you think China needs to do, to get people more into these facilities?
So, besides, building more of these facilities, you need people to staff these facilities. So that's the other challenge, basically. I mean, China, has about like 500,000 of these elder care workers. It's going to need 12 times that amount in order to care for its rapidly aging population. So as such, right now the idea of being an elder care worker is plagued by, issues like low pay, also the perception that it is a job of low social status. You know what I mean? So people don't necessarily want to become an elder care worker. But, China's caught in this conundrum where it will need all these people, basically, to care for its aging population. And so what the government is doing right now is that it is, trying to sort of have university courses that will sort of specialize, in elder care. And also it's asking sort of employers to sort of boost sort of the pay of these workers.
Okay. And, when you were during part of your research, right, when you're looking at all these retirement homes and nursing homes, what does one differ from the other? I mean, in terms of, are we talking about the cost? Are we talking about, what sort of facilities are within the nursing homes?
Yeah, so, generally, all these facilities are divided into two categories, one being, public and the other one being private, right? So the public sort of these retirement homes or nursing homes are very much heavily subsidized by the government, and there is a very long waiting list in order to get into some of these facilities. On the other hand, you have these sort of private sort of nursing homes, which are sort of I guess, up and coming, and then the country really sort of encourages the private sector to develop more of these facilities. However, these facilities end up being very expensive, and so as such, you want to try to find a place that's affordable, that provides you the quality of care, you know what I mean? But on the other hand, there are only so few of these facilities around.
And not to mention that, a lot of these families is one-child policy, right? So it's all on that one child to take care of their parents. Well, on that note, it's time to wrap it up. But thanks so very much, Nicholas, and I'm very impressed with your Mandarin speaking skills as well. Nicholas the Roos there. Now, if you want to find out how else China will meet the impending silver tsunami, make sure you catch Insight's episode of Chinese Taboo, Who Will Care for the Elderly, tonight on CNA at 9 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can, of course, also watch it online on CNA's Video on Demand or CNA Insider's YouTube page. And just before we go, we are going to take you to the World Robot Conference that's underway in Beijing. And there you can find robotics companies through research institutes showcasing their latest innovations.
This is Su Shi, one of China's greatest and most revered poets, in the form of a machine. It's just one of many humanoid robots that can mimic human facial expressions on display at this year's World Robot Conference. It may seem lifelike to some, and that's because its creators have used real-world data in its development.
因为之前的话，人们只能用一种编程的方式去解决机器人的动作问题，而我们的话是完全采集人的数据，用 learning based 的方式来去做。这样的话有几个优点，第一个优点是它采到的数据完全源于人，所以它的动作就非常的接近于人。第二个优点是类似于人的这个有条理的一些逻辑化的一些操作方式，它也会同样被学得会。 并且这样的话，它还跟大模型更容易去结合，完成这种任务。
From artistic and musical skills to a home assistant robot designed to take care of us, there are more than 20 types to impress visitors. One such popular exhibition was this robot crepe chef.
有一个扫码选择你要买的这个煎饼的款式，它总共有2款，一种是辣的，一种是不辣的。我选的是不辣的，还有选的是放2个鸡蛋。选完订单交完钱之后，就可以在扫码开始制作了。制作的过程中也就2分钟，2分钟的时间就可以。
For some, it's more than just convenience. They actually believe robots could be a stopgap for the declining interpersonal relationships in today's society.
那在平时的话，有些话和有些场景里边，我们现在是比较缺乏这种人和人之间的接触，或者是关心，或者很直接的一些照顾。那我觉得这个时候机器人的加入会是很好的去弥补这一块的空白。
Regardless of what the robots are designed for, some of their creators look forward to very soon creating a world where humans and robots can coexist in harmony. The annual World Robot Conference runs till this Sunday.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can also look us up on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.